Hi, thank you for the welcome. I'm excited to be here. I've really enjoyed the talks today and appreciate the opportunity to share some insights with folks today. So, as you mentioned, I'm Jody Bailey. I've been leading technical teams for, I'd say, longer than I'd like to admit. I've had the opportunity to work for large companies, small companies all across the US, opportunity to lead teams both in the US as well as internationally. When I first put this presentation together, I was really focused on the notion of building teams and how to hire and retain talent. Given the current macroeconomic situation where companies like Stripe, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter are all doing large layoffs, and possibly many of you are, I suspect that some of you are thinking a little bit differently than just growing and building new teams. However, as I mentioned, I've been at this a while. I've had the opportunity to lead and build teams throughout the dot-com bust way back when, uh, navigate many different economic crises. And the thing that I've observed is that building resilient teams, the keys to building, the principles for building those teams are largely the same and probably more important now than ever before. So I joined Stack Overflow about 5 months ago, so I haven't been here a terribly long time. I joined after a 3-year stint at AWS, and what I'd like to do is start off by sharing some information about Stack Overflow, and then share some data that we've gathered from our community. So my guess is that many of you are probably familiar with Stack Overflow. It's a massively popular public site. We're used by developers and technologists around the globe who not only reuse the knowledge that we've built over the past 12 years, but also add to that knowledge base by asking and answering questions, as well as voting, adding comments, really just interacting with the community. We see about 100 million people coming to Stack Overflow every month, which makes us one of the top most visited websites in the world. And the rate at which questions are asked is really quite staggering. We see a new question asked every 14 minutes. And I often point to this statistic when people ask me why Stack Overflow is so valued by developers and technologists. And it's really because the problems are complex, they're always changing, and there's always new ways and better ways to solve these problems. And developers and technologists really rely on each other to work through these challenges. It's not always enough to just look at the manuals or go through a formal training course. So we rely on each other, and that's whether it's asking a global community on Stack Overflow or really just turning to a teammate. It's really a team sport. We're really working problems and solutions together. As I mentioned, we're the largest platform for developers and technologists in the world, and we've got representation from virtually every sector around the world. We represent over 230 countries and untold numbers of companies and industries. And with that, we've had the opportunity to learn a lot. Now, despite the economic uncertainty and recent layoffs, demand for developers and technical talent still remains high. In the tech industry alone, there are over 200,000 roles open. And despite the uncertainty and layoffs, demand for developers and technical talent remains high. In 2022, over 175,000 jobs have been added just to the US tech sector, with 20,700 added just last month. Additionally, the skills gap, specifically in tech, is only expected to grow in years to come, creating even more demand for technical talent. Then throw in the great resignation induced by the pandemic, we ended up with a massive reshuffling across industries. Interestingly enough, resignations in tech rank among the highest, with a 4.5% increase in departures in 2021 compared to 2020. Yet the thing is, engineers don't really want to leave their current roles. Keeping teams happy and focused is really the most important work that we can do. whether you're new teams or focusing on existing teams. And beyond being paid fairly, what teams and individuals really want is the opportunity to learn and grow. What I'd like to do is take a look at some of the data that we've captured and share that, and then talk really about how we can create agile, resilient teams to meet the needs of our technology. A recent survey of over 500 years indicated that developers are seeking out flexibility. That includes location, problems to solve, and technologies. The desire to have flexibility was consistent across every age group that we surveyed. That means whether you're a brand new developer or a long-time developer, flexibility is important. Now at Stack, we recognized this early, pre-pandemic, and used it to our advantage. We've been historically a remote-first culture, which pre-pandemic really gave us an advantage in terms of it allowed us to hire top talent without engaging in bidding wars with many of the big companies. These days, that's pretty much table stakes. It's not something your company's offering. It's certainly something I'm sure you've considered or want to consider. The other aspect, of course, is the tech stack. And be challenging on a number of fronts, not the least of which is how do you distribute proficiency? Since, at least in my experience, when you have new technologies, you typically have a couple of strong advocates, and then you really need to figure out how to spread the knowledge and how to skill everybody up. Both of these things contribute to the need to be able to share knowledge and learning both synchronously and asynchronously. So over 50% of developers say the opportunity to learn is important in evaluating current and future employers. Plus, it helps foster a growth mindset and creates a framework for developing your own talent for the roles you're going to need rather than having to rely on finding those individuals later. This is an area where tech stack really comes into play, as there's an opportunity to choose the right tech for the job and also to create learning opportunities for your team. By creating opportunities for them to experiment and share what they learn with others, you really create the opportunity to identify the right technology for the problems you're solving while cultivating that desire for the teams to learn. I know you know technology is evolving quickly, but did you know that 70% of developers are learning a new technology at least once a year? That means by the time someone graduates from college or university, the latest developer language or technology could have changed 4 times. Something kind of an aside that I found super interesting was we found that 50% of respondents wrote their line of code between the ages of 11 and 17. It's interesting to me because it means that many of the first-time developers, by the time they graduate, could have 10 years of experience. Something that we don't often think about when we're hiring new developers and thinking about skilling the individuals up on the team. Aside from their offer, the primary reason developers pull out of an interview process is because they didn't like the tech stack. It's also key to employee happiness and retention, as developers want to ensure they're up to date and marketable. Never mind wanting to ensure that they have the best technologies to deliver value faster. As CTO, you know people want to deliver results. In fact, 50% say productivity and delivering value to the organization contributes to happiness at work. This is great news, really. It's a win-win, right? Because we all want our teams to be more productive too. But we've all been there when we feel like we're just not able to be as productive as possible because we're constantly being interrupted with questions or meetings. It's super frustrating. As I mentioned, resignations in tech rank among the highest, growing significantly year over year. People are moving to the organizations that give them what they want. On top of large work-life balance enhancements, people are looking for places that allow them to be problem solvers and face new challenges. Key to this are learning and training opportunities. Whether you're dealing with folks voluntarily leaving your organization, or if you're faced with the tough situation of reducing your workforce for economic reasons, when your most senior or tenured folks carry the burden of repeatedly answering the same questions and acting as a knowledge repository for their teams, they feel like their productivity is reduced. And while it's rewarding to help someone, repeating the same things over and over again is painful and contributes to reduced productivity and burnout, which in turn can cause them to leave, taking all the knowledge with them. Now, given the rapidly changing landscape of technology, we no longer have the luxury of hiring for a specific skill. Technology is moving too fast, and our orgs are changing too. Personally, when hiring, I'd still look for key technical skills. However, I really focus on hiring for attitude and aptitude. And when I say aptitude, I really mean a capacity and desire for learning. I look for both desire and track record of learning by asking questions during the interview process. For example, what's the most recent significant new skill you learned, and how did you go about it? Or how do you stay current? Or even just what is something that you learned independent of work, and how did you learn about it? Everyone learns differently, and it's important that you know, one, that people are interested and committed to learning, but also how they learn and how your team learns best so that you can support them. Learning can be complex, as you need your teams to learn both institutional knowledge as well as external knowledge. You need to provide as much just-in-time learning as possible in order for your teams to maintain their flow states. And you need to empower your team to learn from each other, while also carving out space and funding for larger, focused learning for big new areas in order to create a self-perpetuating environment of continuous learning. At Stack Overflow, we leverage a number of different ways to foster a culture of learning, and I suspect many of you do as well. For example, we designate specific days to learn, share, and grow. These could be days with organized training, such as bringing in a speaker or a trainer, or just having an organized team learning event. They could also be set aside for people to do their own independent learning. We also leverage things like book clubs, where we're able to share new ideas and concepts and work through those topics as a team or small sets of people. We do tea time talks, where folks are able to share their personal experiences or something they've learned recently and are passionate about, and so on. And the other thing I'd say, as engineering leaders or technology leaders, especially as CTO, it's important to participate and lead by example. If we tell people to participate and then don't do it ourselves, people are more likely to follow our example than our direction. And I don't know about you, but I can say for me, the time spent with the team, learning from the team or learning with the team, are some of the best times I have at work. So I encourage you to create this culture and environment, and then participate with your team. And retaining talent is obviously super important, but creating a culture is important from the very first day. As a relatively new hire at Stack Overflow, I can tell you that the company's commitment to learning was pretty self-evident from the moment I started. The onboarding process can really make or break the individual's experience from day one. And in talking to our customers, onboarding process is a critical component to the early success and long-term retention of employees. Onboarding and retaining talent is important as leaders, but we need to create organizations that are not fragile, where the loss of one or two key individuals doesn't cripple multiple teams or an entire organization. People leaving your teams shouldn't break them. Where I've seen teams really struggle is when tenured members leave and take all the institutional knowledge they've built up with them. It slows down the entire team as people try to pick up the pieces while still trying to move forward. And oftentimes you find that it impacts multiple teams, right? Because the knowledge has been distributed. If it's not just with one person, it's with a couple, and maybe they're not even on the same teams anymore. Asking people to document everything as they go really doesn't work. It's hard to anticipate what people need to know or what they want to know, especially if you're the expert. Things that seem obvious aren't obvious to others. And the other thing is, once you write it down, it quickly becomes out of date. And then certainly asking them to document everything as they're leaving doesn't work at all, right? But people leave. It's normal. It's healthy for the organization. And frankly, it's unavoidable. So you can mitigate it, but you can't prevent it. So what we need to do is we need to plan for it. Now, if planned poorly, this can become a single point of failure for you as a leader, especially when you don't see it coming. The good news is engineers tend to be avid learners. We've already talked about how important learning is to them. So it's important that we enable them to and evolve their knowledge. And empowering your team to learn from each other is essential to upskilling and reskilling teams. And as I mentioned, it's rewarding to provide answers for folks, but it's even more rewarding to teach them to answer questions for themselves. Here are some steps I take with my teams to try to retain knowledge within the organization. I'll touch on these here and then go through them in a bit more detail, but there's 4 key steps that I want to cover. The first one is really figuring out who your subject matter experts are. You may have a good idea who these folks are already, but you can also create them by creating space and opportunity for folks to learn and investigate. You need to make it easy to capture information and then accessible for others to reuse. You need to ensure that it's discoverable, ideally within workflows and tools so that you can minimize distractions and interruptions. Again, trying to maintain that flow state. And then, of course, you want the content, the information to be healthy. It needs to be resilient. Even information incurs debt when it's not maintained. All right, so you want to know who your subject matter experts are, or SMEs. These are the folks that hold the answers when your team has questions. You really need to figure out how to provide asynchronous pathways for your team to uncover those answers without disrupting them. As I mentioned, while they may enjoy helping others, the constant interruptions and answering the same questions over and over again impact their productivity and overall happiness. There are experts across your organization that your team may not even know. Figuring out who they are can be a force multiplier for your teams. You can often identify these people by conversations that you hear or see. And if you're able to make the question and answering public for folks, you're able to quickly identify some of those folks. And then, of course, the culture of learning comes into play when you have areas without SMEs. This is when you want to create the space, the time, opportunity, as well as the resources for folks to develop the expertise that they can then share with others. Making it easy to capture the information and reuse it is critical. Long-form technical documentation has its place, but really should only be used for specific use cases. For example, customer-facing products that can be really useful, sometimes platform-level technology or services documentation. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to ensure that you're addressing the real questions and almost impossible to keep current without really intentional focus on doing so, which often forces you to rely on a few people you'd probably rather have doing something else. Surfacing questions and answers in a public forum ensures the real needs of the consumer are being addressed, requires less time commitment, and allows more people to answer and ensure the information is actually correct and current. Plus, we want folks to be able to get their answers just in time in the flow of their work. By leveraging question and answers, people don't have to read, sort, and interpret a bunch of long-form documentation just to get the answer to a specific question. Here's an example of a simple question asked to our developer community on Stack Overflow nearly 13 years ago. Today, the question has been edited 90 times, upvoted nearly 24,000 times, and viewed over 10 million times, all because the person that had a question asked it in a public forum so that they could get an answer in public. And chances are, if one person in your organization has a question, many others do too. And it's likely there's someone in your org that has the answer with all the historical context that might prove valuable. Not only that, if they don't, chances are a collection of folks can fill in the gaps. But making that scalable is the challenge. So we've all heard the phrase, knowledge is power. Well, finding knowledge can be even more powerful, or maybe more accurately, that is to say that the knowledge is powerless if it can't be found, right? There's little difference between a person who can't find the information and the person that doesn't have access to it or doesn't even know it exists. You have to centralize the information. You need to make it easy to find the first place anyone looks. So this is one of the things that we do at Stack Overflow is we ensure that we have one place where you start, because there are many places to capture different types of documentation. But you want to have one place where you start, where you can begin your search and be pointed to everything you need. You also need to integrate it into workflows that everyone is already using. And ChatOps integration to your tools, to your knowledge management tools, has shown to be most powerful and effective, which makes sense, right? I mean, ChatOps tools, whether it's Slack, Microsoft Teams, or something else, is where people are already going to get help from others. And then, as I mentioned, it needs to be resilient. The two biggest problems with knowledge management is, first, you have to get it out of people's heads. And second is that it quickly becomes out of date. Just like coding or tooling, no matter how big or small, even information has to be maintained. My personal experience as an engineering leader over the years is I've seen documentation platforms have limited lifespan because the information quickly becomes out of date, people lose confidence in it, and eventually nobody even bothers looking at it. It becomes a ghost town. We recently released a new feature in our Stack Overflow for Teams product called Content Health. It's based on research that we've been able to do with our customers and users. Content Health is a set of features that help you maintain the accuracy and relevance of questions and articles within Teams by programmatically identifying and surfacing high-value knowledge that has potentially become out of date. So these are things, this is information that people are looking for, they're reading, but maybe hasn't been updated for some period of time. Or maybe you're getting feedback that indicates it should be updated. What we found was pretty interesting. 90 days after introducing the Content Health feature, monthly editing activity increased by over 600% among the Stack Overflow for Teams customers. Not only was there an obvious need to keep information up to date, people were actually eager to do the updating. We provided a mechanism for them to identify, prioritize, and update the information easily. And we had a really high completion rate. 88% of users that started the review process actually completed it. Best of all, these updates were able to be crowdsourced within the organization so that all the effort didn't fall on one person. This resulted in more engagement, more accurate, and more useful knowledge for the whole organization. Last but not least, ensure it's resilient. We spend far too much time talking about retention as a staffing problem when it's also a knowledge problem. The actions we take to learn need to be a focus, both as individuals and as leaders encouraging our teams. The only way to build resilient teams that scales is really by addressing the knowledge gap via the 4 steps. Uncover or create the subject matter experts. Ensure knowledge is easy to capture so other team members can easily reuse. Ensure the knowledge is easy to discover via your workflow and tools, and ensure knowledge stays relevant, resilient, and up to date. And it all starts with democratizing knowledge within our own teams. Give your teams the time, the tools. That's how we begin to close the knowledge gap and build the foundation for agile and resilient technical teams. Thank you.